Hello, this is Freethought Forum, programmed by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I am Jonas Holdeman.
And I'm Faithless Forrest.
And I'm Joe Barnhart. Welcome.
And I'm Ralph Eisler.
We want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people committed to a life rooted in science and free of supernatural beliefs.
On today's show, we will make the argument for separation of church and state.
So let me talk to you a little about the sponsors. The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has fun meetings at the Barley's in the old city. Starts around 5:30. And look for the silver-jacketed copy of a book called The God Delusion. And there's the Atheist Experience. Says everyone is welcome to our happy hour, food, drink, and pleasant conversation. And come and have a pleasant discussion.
Sure. Okay, well, the Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. The first and third Sunday mornings are usually presentations and lively roundtable discussions. The second Sundays, we hold the Skeptics Book Club. And the fourth Sunday, we have various get-togethers, usually what is called a reflections meeting.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get together on those reflections meetings and have a potluck lunch with them, too. So that makes it a little more of a social activity. And sometimes we play board games or similar activities. And in fact, in this next Sunday, we will have a lecture, and then there will be a meeting to play games of various sorts, which we usually hold over in Earth Fair over in Turkey Creek.
Oh, good.
Oh, later in the show, we will give you our websites to visit for additional details, including times and location. If you'll get your pencil and paper prepared, you can write down that information, and also contact by which you can send us messages during the week.
All right. We need to do the In the News segment here.
In the news. In the news, the website of Rochester, New York chapter of Americans United for Separation of Church and State announced that one of their members will give an atheist invocation in Greece, New York.
The town hall meeting is July 15, that is tonight, and there will be a press conference to follow. Freethought luminaries to be there are Annie Laurie Gaylor of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Ron Lindsay, president of the Center for Inquiry, David, I'm going to mangle this one, Noyce, N-I-O-S-E?
Yeah,
Who is a past president. Niles, okay. Past president of the American Humanist Association and the Secular Coalition for America, and Gregory Lipper, the senior litigant counsel for Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I'll be interested to hear how the news covers that.
Yeah, there's another item I picked up in the news here. A federal appeals court has struck down an Indiana state law that required all couples, even non-believers, to have a member of the clergy officiate at their wedding. So in the unanimous decision, the Seventh Circuit Court ruled yesterday that celebrants, that is like people we have in our organization, can perform marriages in Indiana right now. So writing for the court, Judge Frank Esterbrook said the current law discriminated against atheists, humanists, and members of religious organizations that don't center around a deity like Buddhism. So there you are, and I think we're making progress along various lines. It's slow, but it's sure.
All right. Well, there's a nice place where a monopoly on holding weddings that the clergy wanted to have has been broken.
Yeah, because they want to make sure that those big decisions in life are religious rights over which they have some control.
That's what they're trying. That's what the clergy are often trying to do.
Yeah.
With those particular clergy, that they're power hungry, and the word totalitarianism fits with these guys. Same as in the Soviet Union, you had the worshippers of Marx and Lenin and Stalin were totalitarians. So there's no difference in terms of politics. Totalitarians, whether they call themselves God people or not, are the same.
And anyone who has the outlook that it's my way or the highway, I don't think really can be considered an American in the true spirit of Americanism.
But there are states like Florida where any notary public is authorized to conduct ceremonies, and places where there are basically two ceremonies, a civil and a religious. So can be a separation.
And then I know a person in Texas who does ceremonies. He's not ordained, and people want him to do it, and he does a good job.
Well, it's typical in Europe that you have a civil ceremony, and then if you want, the civil ceremony is the legal one, binding one. And if you want a church wedding, then you can have it. So there are a lot of places like that.
Yeah,
but I have a little bit of a problem with this difference between states and rules between states, and of course it comes up all the time. I think particularly in the South, where they are always wanting states' rights, and whatever that means, we know that there are some hidden meanings in some of those.
Agendas, yes.
Yeah, and I think for a country that's supposed to be solid and put together, that considerations of those individual states' rights ought to be phased out, and they have been to some extent by the interstate commerce
when you
law.
hear states' rights, you often interpret that to mean loss of individual rights.
Right, exactly.
It is a kind of failing of the creation of our nation that when the national government was designed, there was no opportunity to design the state governments. And so there's, in a sense, inconsistency and mismatch. But the difficulty they had getting agreement on the Constitution was a hurdle enough to challenge. If they had said, oh, and by the way, we need to standardize the state constitutions, I think it would have all blown up in their face, and it would never happen.
The principles were there, and they'd become the United States under the Constitution.
Right, but originally those 13 colonies, they were often founded on religious grounds. For instance, Pennsylvania, Maryland, they were respectively Quakers and Roman Catholics. Massachusetts were the Puritans, the Congregationalists. And so you had societies that were knit together, often by religion. And so they had different requirements as far as what they thought was the right thing to do or put into their laws at the time. But we've become so homogenized now that I think not much of that really is justifiable.
I would tend to argue that why should state boundaries that were determined sometimes by the courses of rivers, which were principal means of moving goods and services, or the whim of a long-dead monarch to gift some property to a buddy, why should those states' boundaries be the right ones for us in the 21st century?
Well, I tend to agree with you. I think they're anachronisms. I mean, I would go a little farther. I'm more in favor of a central government, the Alexander Hamilton type, perhaps, and have federal districts drawn, and no gerrymandering so far as representation goes.
Meaning north-south, straight lines, and let it fall where it may?
Yeah, kind of stuff like that.
If we were to start with a blank slate and we had no memory of where the state boundaries were, it's an interesting question to lay down. What should something like the minor divisions of a nation be? What are the right principles?
Well, that's the key word, is principles. Where you draw the lines for states is secondary. It's the principles that should cross over lines. And then in defensive states, if you make a huge mistake on a federal level, that's a major mistake. If one state makes a mistake, then at least you don't have as big a catastrophe. That's about the...
Well, yes, that's the argument for limiting the rights of government, is to prevent those big mistakes. And
we're talking now about limiting the rights of state power over individuals. because that's what states' rights. In fact, I keep emphasizing the Baptists because they were major leaders in this. John Leland opposed the Constitution until they had the Bill of Rights. He said a Constitution that does not guarantee individual rights is not a Constitution of liberty.
So how many people here had heard about the story of James Madison's evolution on that?
On the Constitution, on the Bill of Rights, yes. Yeah, he initially opposed them because he thought that after a few years, people would construe a written set of Bill of Rights to be the only rights that people had. And we can see that his fears have been carried out to some extent when you have a judge like Antonin Scalia who says that it's not in the Constitution. There's no right to privacy in the Constitution, so that cannot be a right.
So what do you think helped overcome Madison's reluctance?
Well, I don't know. I never met the man myself, but I would think that he was a reasonable guy and that Jefferson probably talked him into it, or some of the other people talked him into it. Some of the religious people talked him into it.
I was reading where when it came to ratifying the Constitution, approving the Constitution in the state of Virginia, the Virginians were upset about lack of guarantees of freedom of religion. And so Madison promised that that would be corrected with the amendments. And indeed, he was the person who wrote the amendment dealing with freedom of religion.
Right. And Virginia had an established church. The Anglican Church was the established church in Virginia.
So I guess what I was fishing for is the fact that there was the addition in the amendments of the Ninth Amendment, and the Ninth Amendment, I think I got the number right, says that the enumeration of certain rights shall not be construed to limit other rights not enumerated. And I can't help but think that if Supreme Court justices today make arguments like Ralph said Kennedy did, that Scalia, that man, he's not been reading his Constitution lately.
It is amazing. This particular guy we're talking about, Scalia, he doesn't read the Constitution apparently. That's just when he's supposed to. But
I think he picks and chooses.
Yeah, it's like I always think of him as like reading your face in a cloud.
Meaning finding your own face in a cloud.
Yeah. It's the way he reads the Constitution.
All right. Well, before the Constitution, though, the nation had a, dialogue over the appropriate roles of church and state. And, in fact, prior to the adoption of the Constitution, there were 13 colonies, 13 little independent nations, and all of them had some kind of a constitution. In one case, the one state had a constitution that was not much more than a paragraph that said there should be a legislative body. But the majority of their constitutions had explicit religious tests, and those explicit religious tests would have mandated that people, to hold public office, you not merely had to believe in a God, but you had to be of a Protestant faith. That the tests would often rule out Jewish people, Muslims, and Catholics. So you were seeing that there was this, where a tradition had crept in where those in power in a majority were trying to legislate the continuance of their majority.
Sure, and that kind of brings us to what got us on this topic today, doesn't it? Which was Steve Kelly, who's on the Roane County Commission. He's an atheist. He was trying to convince the commission not to put in God We Trust signs up on the courthouse, I guess it was, but he was outvoted 13-1. There are a lot of people who don't think that church-state separation is a good thing. at least around this area. We went through this same thing in Anderson County a year or so ago, and with the same result, that the signs got put up on the courthouse.
And you know, as Annie Laurie Gaylor of the Freedom from Religion Foundation is fond of saying about the "In God We Trust" motto, is that it's simply not true. If you wanted a true statement, it would be, "In God only some of us trust."
Well, it depends on what you trust God for. When I wanted my plumbing fixed, I didn't call God, I called a good plumber. And whatever his religion was, it's his business until he can fix the plumbing. And I expect any Baptist preacher goes to a dentist rather than to God to get his teeth fixed. And when they go to the dentist conference, they don't go leading it in prayer because it's already solemnized. You don't need to have a prayer to solemnize a conference. And it's solemn because your teeth are important. And what these people do in the political meetings, if it's important, then do the job and quit trying to pretend that you know something about other people's religion. Most of these people who want to push this could put on a postage stamp what they know about theology. They're as wise about theology as I am, say, about being an electrical engineer. And nobody would hire me as an electrical engineer unless they wanted their heads examined.
Yeah. All righty. But we have, you know, this, you know, system of popular election. And so we are kind of stuck with this sort of problem that if you want to get elected, you often are going to have to profess religion, and we see that, you know, especially at the presidential levels, when we saw the debates, the various candidates were claiming that they were inspired by God to run, and made that argument. And you know, apparently, if the candidates were true, God wanted several of them to run. And
yeah, see, my question
I think those were only on the Republican side, so God must be Republican.
Well,
I have a Baptist friend who believes in the devil. I think she thinks most of them are Republicans, however. And I think it's kind of funny. She's very conservative in religion, but when it comes to trusting, she's so conservative she doesn't trust Republicans. And I said, well, some Democrats are as demonic as Republicans.
Well, there's probably not a church around with a steeple that doesn't have a lightning rod attached.
Exactly.
And even what is it, St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. If you look up there, there's a cross, but if you look very carefully, it's surrounded by a Faraday cage.
Oh, really?
To protect it from the light, from God's.
So maybe we should have, in science and electrical engineers we trust. And also I would add in plumbers and electricians we trust. And above all, in moms. I think moms are cheated in this. It's moms who taught the golden rule.
You're saying moms as in mothers.
As mothers.
I heard mobs as in mob rule.
No.
Okay, sorry.
No, and the reason I'm saying that, in mom or mothers we trust because they're the ones who mostly taught us ethics anyhow, including Moses. It was Moses' mother who probably taught him not to steal and lie and do all kinds of things supposedly that he got from heaven.
So,
and that's six, I would say Moses probably lied in giving God credit for what his mother gave him.
So this move lately to put "In God We Trust" on the public buildings, why do we suppose that's happening?
I think somebody just decided that, like the Pharisees in the square, you know, that they would go out and proclaim to the world that this was God's country, something of the sort. And difficulties, you can't really challenge it because it is the country's motto.
Adopted by Congress in 1957,
I think, or 6 or 7.
They forgot,
Might be 57.
They forgot the passage quoting Jesus, opposing public, offering your prayers in public.
I think that's in the book of Matthew, but I wouldn't be able to cite chapter and verse.
Gospels, yes.
All right. Well, but when you put this plaque up on a government building, aren't we literally saying, aren't the people who vote to do that literally voting to support God with our government building? They are literally
They're propagating their own religion, yeah.
I think so.
Well, I think there are two interpretations. One could be that they trust in God and they're using this public edifice to display their beliefs, kind of to lend extra authority to it. And then there's the one who, by the we, they mean the legislature and somehow or other try to include everyone. One of the things that really annoys me is listening to reporters and so on, and they'll say something like, Americans believe that, and I don't believe that, and no one asked me.
Yeah.
And they use the word we believe this, so that they try to include themselves in lending authority of the crowd to what they're saying.
Right, and I think that's exactly why these statements get put up. You know, they know there are people out there who disagree with them, but they want to make sure the world can see, well, really, we all trust in God somewhere of the sort.
Yeah,
So
they usually mean their particular version of God, too.
Yeah, well, they have to be kind of careful about keeping it generic. You know, I remember the arguments at the Anderson County Commission, well, everybody believes in some kind of God, you know, which is not true, of course.
That's vague enough.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyhow.
Maybe we should put, we trust in something or other.
Yeah, that is pretty vague. It's not a very useful tool.
Yeah, and I've got to think about whether I trust in anything at all.
We often trust in something or other. Right?
Yeah. I trust my brakes when they've been properly inspected and maintained.
Sure.
We trust a lot of things.
Sure.
You know, I trust you. I mean, here you are not slugging me if I disagree with you. I mean, that's a lot.
Not yet, anyway.
I would trust but verify, right?
All right.
Wasn't that Reagan's statement?
Yeah. So
I wonder if we could apply that.
All right. Well, I think you're calling for verification.
I'm calling for verification.
So, I guess if you're going to put "In God We Trust" up on the government buildings, should we ask for reciprocity and ask the churches to say in the Constitution they shall abide?
That's asking for a lot.
Or perhaps in the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It actually says that, you know.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, okay, I don't know. Well, how about some of our founding fathers were pretty big on separation of church and state?
Well, I keep thinking about the irony of putting this plaque up on a building where it's saying, "In God We Trust," and literally the government building is supporting this message of God.
And that's using state property with state money to support a particular religion.
Yep. And I'm reminded of our founders, and one of the earliest things I know of is I dug it out and discovered that it was part of a letter by Benjamin Franklin to Richard Price. And I'll quote the part that often gets quoted.
Yeah, this is
when a religion is good, I conceive that it will support itself. And when it cannot support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so that its professors are obliged to call for the help of the civil powers, it is a sign, I apprehend, of it being a bad one.
Yeah.
So, once again, why do the people who think that in God we trust need to have it supported on the government buildings and on the government money?
Well, maybe because they feel that by itself it wouldn't stand. I mean, you know, most of the mainline Protestant churches are losing members. The numbers aren't now quite so big, but if you look at the demographics, group between 18 and 34, they're just, not participating in churches.
Yeah, even the Mormons are having a little earthquake right now because the women saying, maybe we should be bishops, women.
Yeah.
And this is a few tremors out there in Utah.
Yeah, and the Anglican Church just approved women bishops. Yeah. So, but anyhow, the point that you're making here is that these fellows who were instrumental in the beginning country and finding the Constitution, no matter what they believe, whether they were strong believers or not, it seems to me that most of them eventually came around to the point of view that the church and state should not be mixed, because there's a lot of argument in Constitutional Convention, about putting God and religious language into the Constitution. And eventually the people who were against it prevailed, but they convinced the others.
I was going to say prevail seems the wrong word. That implies simply brute force majority versus persuasion.
Well, they did.
Well,
I think what happens with the church-state thing, Jefferson clearly was for church-state separation, and a strong movement among Baptists. The reason I keep quoting the Baptists, that's more the tradition I know more about. And they early came out in favor of Jefferson because the Baptists knew traditionally what it was like to be discriminated against. Now, some Baptist preachers today don't even know their own history, even though it's taught in their theology school. I don't know whether some of them went to sleep or what. Well, when I went to seminary, I talked to some of these guys, and some of them learned it quickly, and some of them apparently did sleep through class and just missed it.
I was always of the impression that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there are a lot of Baptist churches which are very independent. That is, they don't belong to a large group.
Right.
And that they remain independent, and they're very happy to have church-state separation. But groups like the Southern Baptists, who want to have some control in the government, rebel against that church.
Well, the Southern Baptists split on this issue.
Did they?
Yeah, they sure did. Furthermore, Kennedy, when he went to speak in Houston, if my memory is right, spoke there in Houston because the Southern Baptists had invited him to speak on church separation, because Kennedy, from his advisors, knew that was the Baptist tradition.
I'm thinking it was called something like an evangelical group.
Most Baptists there in Houston were evangelical.
And they would have been a member, because he addressed something, a group, I think it had the term evangelical in it, but it might be an association that would have included the Baptists of which you spoke. Well, he said something really great about that. I think I got it here in our notes. Can someone find that? I read the last piece. Yeah, we'll be near the end of the notes.
Well, maybe we should take a little break here and acknowledge our sponsors. Could we do that now, or do you want to wait?
I got it here.
Oh, okay.
Why don't you grab it, Jonas?
Well, then go ahead.
The Kennedy quote. He says, "Neither do I look with favor upon those who would work to subvert Article 6 of the Constitution by requiring a religious test, even by indirection. Or if they disagree with that safeguard, they should be openly working to repeal it. Contrary to common newspaper usage, I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party candidate for president who happens also to be a Catholic. I do not speak for my church on public matters, and the church does not speak for me. Whatever issue may come before me as president, if I should be elected on birth control, divorce, censorship, gambling, or any other subject, I will make my decision in accordance with these views, in accordance with what my conscience tells me to be in the national interest, without regard to outside religious pressure or dictates. And no power or threat of punishment could cause me to decide otherwise. But if the time should ever come, and I do not concede any conflict to be remotely possible, when my office would require me to either violate my conscience or violate the national interest, then I would resign the office, and I hope any other conscientious public servant would do likewise. But I do not intend to apologize for these views of my critics of either Catholic or Protestant faith, nor do I intend to
this is John Kennedy.
Yeah.
to disavow either my views or my church in order to win this election. If I should lose on the real issues, I shall return to my seat in the Senate, satisfied that I had tried my best and was fairly judged. But if this election is decided on the basis that 40 million Americans lost their chance for being president on the day they were baptized, then it is the whole nation that would be the loser, in the eyes of Catholics and non-Catholics around the world, in the eyes of history, and in the eyes of our own people.
And I think that's a great thing.
I think somebody should read that at some of the debates that the Republicans will have for the next presidential election. Because you've got guys like Mike Huckabee and Rick Santorum, and Rick Perry.
And they're all out trying to out-religious one another.
Yeah.
And talk about how God is guiding them and wanting to set policy for our nation depending upon their interpretation of a holy book.
That's a pretty good reason to be very suspicious of anybody who's claiming his political view is sent to him by God. And that's a dangerous man or woman.
I hear these people say that God talks to them. Now, I can't get the feeling from them that they actually hear a voice, in which case they may well be schizophrenic or something. But somehow or other, they think that whatever decision they come to must be God's decision.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a word for that we have to watch out for. It's called megalomania. When we think our views are God's views, I don't know a better word than just megalomania. I mean, the traditional view of God is he's omniscient. I think the word humble ought to apply here.
Yeah, we were talking about humility before, but you could use a little more of it in politics these days. There's no doubt about that. Well, shall we do the...
If Sam can run the mid-program break for us.
In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions. Shows are live most every Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Community Access Television Channel 6 or Channel 12, depending on your cable network. Tell your out-of-town friends to see us streaming online at ctvknox.org.
This is a call-in show, and we are live today, July 15th, 2014, and viewers usually can call in, but we're in the big studio today with no phone lines, so you'll have to settle for going to the Freethought TV Facebook page and leaving us messages there that we can get back to. All right, and can we do the informative break?
Okay.
And
do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org. If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun.
Okay, monthly, the Rationalists of East Tennessee have the Skeptics Book Club. The title of the August book is Deconverted, A Journey from Religion to Reason by Seth Andrews. The public is invited to attend this and to participate. If you have read the book, that's fine. If you haven't, you're still welcome to come to participate. Meeting time is at Barnes & Noble Book Club store at 4:00 p.m., and that's on Sunday, the 10th of the month, August.
Right. So both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee provide a social outlet where you can find that if you don't believe in God, that you're not alone. Okay, so
we were discussing separation of church and state, and we had a little quote from Benjamin Franklin. I believe he wrote that in expressing disappointment in established religion happening in either Massachusetts or Pennsylvania. And a little time after that, James Madison wrote something called the Memorial and Remonstration, where he was trying to, while he was opposing and successfully the establishment in Virginia of taxation to support churches.
Yeah, Patrick Henry was the one who had introduced that into the Virginia Assembly, and it was apparently just some small pittance that all Virginia citizens were being required to pay to support educators of Christian education. And so Madison prepared this defense, and it's something I think that most people should really read. I mean, he touches on all of the subject specifically for this particular bill, but the ideas apply to much of what goes on in the issue of separation of church and state. Now, he starts off and gives because of this, because of that, and Forrest, would you?
Well, there's a favorite clause I have, and deals with, Jonas, you were saying that the tax was a pittance, a small amount, and so therefore it was meant to sort of, because it didn't take a deep bite, people wouldn't oppose it. And Madison addresses that and says, because it is proper to take alarm at the first experiment on our liberties, we hold this prudent jealousy to be the first duty of citizens and one of the noblest characteristics of the late Revolution. The free men of America do not wait until usurped power has strengthened itself by exercise and entangled the question of precedence. So
what he means by that is look at the European history where they did this, let's support our religion, and then they got into a squabble as whose version is it going to be, and after a while, instead of having good arguments, they had good swords to settle the issue. And Madison wanted to avoid that kind of stupidity. You don't need to kill off people. I always wanted to say to some of the Muslims, why is it you're so afraid of open debate? Now, this is over in Saudi Arabia, not Muslims in this country, but in Saudi Arabia, what are you afraid of? And this is what Madison is trying to say, is you don't need the state to propagate your religion if you've got a religion, and Franklin was with him. If you've got a religion worth defending, then do so without using the state to do it.
Yeah, but the mullahs in Saudi Arabia have that power, and they want to keep the power.
And it's vicious.
It's vicious.
Well, Forrest, could you continue?
Well, I thought we should discuss that thing about strengthened by exercise. So, where have we seen things like that? Well, earlier we talked about the national motto got established in 1956-57.
Right.
And now they're strengthening it by exercise. They're wanting to put it on all the government buildings.
And isn't this just the question we were talking about in the Supreme Court in the Greece versus Galloway decision, that a lot of the opinion, I think written by Justice Kennedy, was, well, it's sort of a precedent.
It's
right?
tradition. There's a lot. We use the word history a lot.
Okay, whatever. But I mean, if you really look at what that opinion said, it means, well, it doesn't matter much, It's really kind of a useless thing that people have gotten accustomed to doing, having a prayer before a meeting.
Sometimes we use history like a cafeteria. We pick what we want to quote from history.
Sure. Yeah. Of course.
There is an interesting tie-in that although at the Constitutional Convention there was a request by Franklin for a prayer when they got into a heated argument.
Yeah.
It turns out that prayer never happened. The people who will say that they prayed in the Constitutional Convention, what they're doing is they're quoting Franklin's suggestion that they calm down and have a prayer.
Yeah.
But the minutes of the meeting show that it sort of turned into a discussion of the appropriateness of it, and then they never had it.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, the Constitution, by the way, permits private prayer.
Yeah, it's our Constitution prevents the government from being hijacked by people to promote
their version of it.
Their version. The common property is not going to be used to support a sectarian prayer because there is no uniformity of religious opinion.
Right.
And so, Jonas, you thought there was some merit in what followed? They saw all the consequences in this principle, and they avoided the consequences by denying the principle?
Yeah.
All right. We revere this lesson too much soon to forget it. Who does not see that the same authority which can establish Christianity in exclusion of all other religions may establish with the same ease any particular sect of Christians in exclusion of all other sects? That the same authority which can force a citizen to contribute 3 pence only of his property for the support of any one establishment may force him to conform to any other establishment in all cases whatsoever.
Could I recommend a good book for our readers called Revolution Within the Revolution? And it's the First Amendment in historical context from 1612 to 1789 by William R. ESTEP, forwarded by Bill Moyers, 2 Baptists.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's revolution within the revolution, and they're saying that the revolution for America started in England even, trying to gain their liberties and learning even
from the monarchy or from the church or both?
The monarchy and the church were united.
There we go.
If you want to read a book on it, read Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, in which the Leviathan is a monster of the two together.
Oh, I didn't know that that's what the title referred to. I'm ignorant on that.
Yeah.
All right.
I think the book of Job is where it comes from.
That is where
of course,
Leviathan
the modern creationists say that was a dinosaur.
Yeah. You haven't been visiting that museum up in Kentucky now, Ralph.
No, I haven't.
All right. So, I really like this phrase about strengthened by exercise and entangled by question of precedent. But there are a lot of other great points made in the memorial and remonstration. Has anyone else highlighted any they would like to share with us?
Oh, well, I like this one. In fact, I kind of double highlighted it. And this kind of deals with regarding church and state, religion and state as being, religion and society, he's referring to society there, as being completely separate, kind of maybe along the lines of Stephen Jay Gould's non-overlapping magisteria that I heard the word from you.
That you've taken that a little out of context. What did complete the whole thing with the non-overlapping magisteria? What was Gould talking about?
I think in Gould's case it had to do with science and religion.
Science and religion.
But you see the same idea that the two have certain incompatibilities and they shouldn't overlap.
Well, I think you could say if you have a church-state separation, if you have government not interfering, say, with education, like firing professors who don't agree with a political or religious outview, then you can have open discussion and where religion can thrive and atheism can thrive, Buddhism can thrive, and Franklin's view is right. Then you go where your heart and mind take you, and then give your money to the one that your heart is into. Don't go giving your money to the government and then let other people distribute the money according to the dictates of their conscience, or if they don't have a conscience, the dictates of their sociopathology.
Okay, well, my quote here, it's in the context of the conflict between society and religion, and he says, "True it is that no other rule exists by which any question which may divide a society can be ultimately determined but the will of the majority." So he's advocating the democratic approach to solving problems, but he says it's also true that the majority may trespass on the rights of the minority, which in our country it's patriotic to talk about democratic process and democracy and so on. But you must realize that our experience is in the context of the Bill of Rights and the limitations the Constitution imposes on what government and ultimately people can do. So that it's that regulated democracy that seems to work, and a pure democracy can be just as tyrannical as any despot.
Yes. Yeah, of course. And getting back to what started us on this show, when we did put up the "In God We Trust" signs on the Anderson County Courthouse, a lady in Oak Ridge wrote into the paper and said, well, she didn't really think this was appropriate, and she didn't necessarily trust in God, et cetera, et cetera. And then somebody else wrote back and said, well, this is a country where majority rules, so just suck it up, basically, okay? That type of thing. So, of course, I had to write a letter back and point out that nowhere was this God in the Constitution at all. But that's the type of thinking that goes on, though, that if you're in the majority, you have the right to impose your ideas and your prescriptions on the minority.
So the Memorial and Remonstration was written in 1785. This is 2 years before the Constitutional Convention. Now, when the Constitutional Convention occurred, we had another nice innovation, and that was the prohibition against religious tests. Shall we grab that section here and maybe read what our Constitution has to say on that?
Sure.
And one of the problems is they had, and that is whose religion would be the test.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So even before the Constitution was amended, we had Article 6, and it's paragraph 3. And it's the same Article 6 that Kennedy's speech was referring to. The senators and representatives, before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all the executives and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. But no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. This was, you were talking about, this book here was the revolution within the revolution. Well, this revolution here, this was revolutionary because at the time this was adopted, many of the states had explicit religious tests, and those religious tests were so exclusive as to deny Catholics and Jews and Muslims the right to hold office. They were tests. Some states had tests that you had to specifically belong to a Protestant faith.
Yeah.
So there in the Constitutional Convention, a kind of revolution occurred, saying, no, we're changing how this is going to be.
Yeah.
And you know, also within the Constitution is the important phrase that you know, the Constitution of the United States is the law of the supreme law of the land. The states couldn't opt out on that requirement.
Well, they, as you say, a number of the states had religious tests, okay, or holding public office. And by the time of the convention, several of them had gotten away. Jefferson was most proud of doing away with that requirement in Virginia. And he said if it one accomplishment on his tombstone, that was it, okay? And so by the time the Constitution was signed, I forget, there were still some states that had religious tests, but soon afterwards they got rid, except for one that went into the early 1800s. I can't remember.
The state of Tennessee still has it in its constitution.
Well, it says that atheists can't.
It doesn't use the word atheist. It says that you have to believe in
Supreme being, or
I'm not sure about that, but you have to believe in a life after death with rewards and punishments for how this life is lived.
See, the assumption was if you didn't believe in life after death, you didn't have enough conscience to do what's right, which is kind of interesting. If some of these people thought they were not going to live in the next life, would they steal and commit rape and whatever? That's an interesting question about their character.
Yeah, it is, and this is one that comes up all the time. You know, I've had these people tell me, you know, well, if you don't believe in God, how can you have any ethics? And I just ask them that question, you know, well, who would you be killing or robbing if you didn't believe in God?
So maybe he's telling us something about himself.
Yes, absolutely.
but
I don't think people really believe that. They just draw that up. You know?
Well, they've been told it, and they've accepted it without deep thought.
Yeah, right.
Now, some of the preacher who told him a few may actually be sociopaths who know how to manipulate religion. But all groups have sociopaths in them, so we don't want to stress just one group. But we need to be aware of that.
Well, I don't know. I don't meet any at the Ask meetups.
Now, I don't know if any sociopath says, I want to let you know right away I'm a liar and cheat.
okay, but this provision still remains in the state constitution, and anyone who thinks that they might use it to disqualify a candidate, remember that there are people who are just waiting. The legislators are not apt to remove it, but it sits there, and if anyone should use it to challenge a candidate's qualifications, then you have the opportunity to bring it up in court and take it up
to a level where it would be declared unconstitutional.
Yeah, the trouble is it takes so much effort to run a campaign or something that nobody's going to do it solely on those grounds, I think, although it would be tempting.
So the Tennessee Constitution has 3 prohibitions against holding public office. You cannot have engaged in duels, which has become somewhat redundant because duels are now a felony and you can't be a convicted felon and run for office. So I think the due process is felt to have been served, that if you're a convicted felon, they can deny you the opportunity to hold office. We've also mentioned that you have to believe in an afterlife, which would disqualify me. But there was another qualification, and that is that you could not be a minister of the cloth.
Right.
That was struck down when a minister running in a primary was challenged by his opponent, trying to get him removed from the ballot, and it was promptly struck down as unconstitutional. And that happened, I think, in the 70s or something like that.
I don't remember.
So, the Virginia Act for Establishing Religious Freedom, that is one of Jefferson's proudest accomplishments,
Yeah.
is often cited.
Yes.
Did you have a favorite phrase or two from that in the minute or so that we have left?
Not one that I can draw up
Well, from
immediately.
Jefferson, here's one from Jefferson. It says, in terms of the government's interference, in other words, legitimate power of government extended to such acts only are injurious to others, to have government
Yeah.
interference. And it says you don't need it because people, in effect, people won't pick your pockets and so forth. They don't believe in
Right.
God, is what it amounts to.
How about this idea? Errors cease to be dangerous when it is permitted freely to contradict them.
Yes.
Yeah, I like
Yeah. Yeah, I have a great book. It's called It's Nobody's Business If You Do. And it's basically a discussion of acts between consenting adults and whether the government should have any interference in them, like sodomy laws or marijuana even, things like that. That'd be a good book to discuss sometime.
Yeah, marijuana ought to be its own punishment as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned.
Well, this was
And
written by
the same for tobacco.
a guy named Peter Williamson, who at one point became a good friend of William Buckley, the conservative icon. And Peter Williams had AIDS, and he was dying of AIDS, and the only thing that would allow him to eat at all or, really live semi-normal was to smoke marijuana, so he said. And he was taken to court, and the judge says, well, if you do this again, you're going to jail, for many years, something like that. And the result of it was he choked to death in his own vomit in the bathtub at one time because he couldn't keep anything down. So I just bring that up because of that's a whole different discussion, but it's government and individuals, which we are kind of getting
How about
into.
this quick insight into Jefferson's attitude towards legislators, that the impious presumption of legislators and rulers, civil as well as ecclesiastical, who, being themselves fallible and uninspired men, have assumed dominion over the faith of others, setting up their own opinions and modes of thinking as the only true and infallible, and endeavoring to impose them on others.
Yeah.
One Protestant.
Time to go.
Yeah, we're going to have
we're
to
gonna
sign
have
out now. Jonas, you're number one?
Oh, it's time now to start wrapping things up. I hope you have gotten your pencil and paper out if you're interested in contacting us. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I am Jonas Holdeman.
I'm Faithless Forrest. Please send us feedback at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
And you can see us on this program at 5 o'clock each Tuesday Eastern Time, 5 in Knoxville Station, and also at 2100 Greenwich time. No, yeah.
That's okay. All right. Well, we'd like to thank our viewers and Sam, who is doing our camera work over here, and for all the technical support to the staff at CTV, KNOX, and to all our
And you're not alone.
callers.
You're not